In the years since their split, Blake Shelton and Miranda Lambert have lived in two different worlds, two different stories that somehow keep orbiting the same center. Their marriage lasted just 4 years, but its impact has stretched across an entire decade, shaping rumors, shaping careers, and shaping the way millions of fans view love, heartbreak, betrayal, and the complicated truth of what really happens behind closed doors. But here's the thing. Every story has two sides. And then there's the truth that never makes the headlines, because while the world knows about the divorce, the drama, the accusations, and the music that followed, very few people understand what was actually happening between Blake and Miranda, long before the cameras caught the cracks. Tonight we go deep. Not into the clickbait, not into the tabloids, but into the timeline, the patterns, the choices, and the emotional collision that turned one of country music's most powerful couples into one of its most complicated mysteries. This is the story the public thought they knew, and the story they never saw coming. Blake Shelton once said that meeting Miranda Lambert changed everything he thought he knew about love. It wasn't slow. It wasn't careful. It was the kind of connection that hits like a lightning strike, sudden, blinding, impossible to ignore. They met on stage. They sang together. The chemistry was instant. Too instant. Blake was married at the time. Miranda was young, rising, and hungry for the kind of success that demanded all of her time and all of her heart. But one duet turned into a friendship. A friendship turned into something deeper. And by the time Blake announced his divorce, the world already had questions about the timeline. Questions that never fully went away, because when two people begin in chaos, the story rarely settles into calm. When Blake and Miranda finally married in 2011, fans saw a fairy tale, a perfect couple representing two different lanes of country music finally blending into one. But behind the scenes, the pressure was intense. Blake was becoming a household name on The Voice. Miranda was becoming the most awarded artist in country music. Two rising empires. One marriage trying to survive in the middle. Their schedules never lined up. Their priorities didn't grow in the same direction. And fame, the thing that brought them together, slowly began pushing them apart. Because success changes people, but it doesn't always change them together. This is the part the fans never fully let go of. Both Blake and Miranda faced cheating rumors throughout the marriage. Sometimes the stories were vague. Sometimes they were specific. Sometimes they came out of nowhere. Did it happen? Did it not? The truth is, only two people ever know. And neither one has ever given the world a clear answer. But there's something important to remember. When a marriage starts with questions, it often ends with accusations. Blake once implied that Miranda had been unfaithful. Miranda implied Blake wasn't always honest. Their music hinted at pain neither of them could say out loud, and instead of healing together, they started defending themselves separately. That is the moment the marriage truly began to unravel. By 2015, the divorce wasn't a shock to the people who knew them personally. They could feel the distance. They could see the exhaustion. They could tell the two were running on fumes. But to the outside world, it felt sudden. Too sudden. The divorce statement was short, cold, and final. Two people, no kids. No assets that couldn't be separated. Blake later said, but what he didn't say was that their lives had been emotionally untangling for years. For Miranda, the divorce felt like a wound she didn't ask for. For Blake, it felt like the end of a storm he could no longer stand in. And when people are hurting, they don't always choose silence, they choose survival. Blake moved on quickly. Almost immediately. His connection with Gwen Stefani shocked the world. Some saw it as a rebound. Some saw it as fate. Some saw it as a message. But the timing forced people to question whether Blake had really been emotionally gone long before the divorce papers were signed. Miranda didn't move on in the same way. Her heartbreak lingered in her music, in her interviews, In the way she disappeared from the spotlight, her songs told the story Blake never did. Songs about betrayal. Songs about regret. Songs about losing someone who once felt like a soulmate. She wasn't pointing fingers. She was processing the ending of the biggest chapter of her life. Years passed. Both remarried. Both healed in public, yet privately carried the weight of a relationship that burned fast. Bright, and ultimately too hot to control. But still, fans couldn't shake the feeling that something was unresolved. Why did Blake hint that Miranda was unfaithful? Why did Miranda's lyrics sound like she was the one betrayed? Why did the timeline of their new relationships feel too close for comfort? Even now, pieces of their story feel unfinished, because some endings aren't clean. Some endings don't come with closure. Some endings just stop, and the truth gets buried under new lives, new marriages, new priorities, but it never disappears. Whether fans want to admit it or not, Blake and Miranda changed country music. Their marriage shaped storylines, inspired albums, and gave the world some of the most emotionally raw songs of their careers. Miranda became stronger, Blake became softer, and the lessons they learned together shaped the people they became apart. Their marriage didn't fail because of one moment. It failed because two people grew in different directions while the world watched every misstep. Sometimes love doesn't end because it dies. Sometimes it ends because the world becomes too heavy for it to carry. So what was the real story of Blake Shelton and Miranda Lambert? Not the rumors. Not the accusations. Not the blame that fans still argue about online. The real truth is this. Two people loved each other deeply. Two people hurt each other unintentionally. Two people tried to build a life together while standing on foundations that were already cracked. And in the end, they let each other go so they could finally breathe again. That's not betrayal. That's not scandal. That's human. And sometimes, that's the only truth the story needs. There was a time when Blake Shelton lived in a world built entirely around tour buses, neon lights, and the endless hum of the road. He was the man who never stopped moving, never stopped singing, never stopped chasing the next big moment on stage. Crowds roared for him, cameras followed him, and the world knew his name long before anyone in his life called him Dad. In those days, family wasn't something he ran from, but it wasn't something he slowed down long enough to imagine either. His life was a fast-moving train, and for years, Blake kept riding it, never really questioning where it was taking him. Then came a moment so quiet it barely made a sound. Gwen Stefani walked into his life, not with fireworks, not with an explosion, but with a softness he hadn't realized he'd been missing. And with her came 3 young boys who didn't care about fame, or chart positions, or how many awards he had sitting on a shelf somewhere. They only cared about whether he'd show up. And keep showing up. Blake never forgot the night he realized his life had changed. It wasn't during a concert or an interview. It was sitting on a couch, surrounded by Legos, empty snack bowls, and the kind of chaos only kids can create. One of the boys had fallen asleep on his shoulder, tiny fingers wrapped around the fabric of his shirt like he was holding onto the one place in the world he felt safe. Blake didn't move for nearly an hour. He didn't want to. Something had shifted inside him, something he never felt standing on any stage. Suddenly, the sound of laughter in the living room felt louder than applause in any arena. For the first time in his life, Blake Shelton wasn't thinking about the next tour, the next show, or the next radio single. He was thinking about little league practices, homework checks, late-night talks, and what kind of man he wanted to be for boys who were learning how to navigate a world much bigger than themselves. It wasn't about replacing their father. It was about standing beside them as someone they could count on. People who knew Blake in the early days could see the difference instantly. He'd always been quick to crack a joke, but now there was a softness behind his humor, a steadiness in his voice that hadn't been there before. His priorities shifted so dramatically that even his career began reflecting it. He started telling interviewers that home mattered more than the road. He chose staying present over staying booked. And when he said he was stepping away from The Voice, it wasn't because he was tired, it was because for once, he wanted to be still. He often talks about how the boys didn't just change his life, they expanded it. They taught him patience in moments that tested him, humility in moments that softened him, and love in ways he didn't know he could feel. They taught him that being strong didn't always mean being loud, and that the most important audience he would ever have wasn't seated in front of a stage. They were sitting around the dinner table, waiting for him to come home. The world watched the transformation happen. Blake Shelton, the man who used to live for late-night performances and wild tour schedules, became the man who proudly called himself a bonus dad. The kind of man who left early to pick kids up from school. The kind of man who traded guitar riffs for video games, applause for family road trips, award nights for backyard barbecues where nobody cared about who he was, only that he was there. And somewhere between helping with school projects and learning how to navigate a house full of growing personalities, Blake found something he didn't even know he'd been looking for: peace, purpose, a life that didn't need spotlights to feel meaningful. Kids didn't just change Blake Shelton, they completed him. In the years since, Blake Shelton and Miranda Lambert walked away from the life they built together. Their worlds have stretched in opposite directions, like two stars pulled apart by gravity, yet somehow still caught in the same orbit. Their marriage lasted only 4 years, but its shadow has stretched across an entire decade, shaping their futures, their music, and the way millions of people interpret love, loss, and the quiet kind of heartbreak that doesn't always make headlines, but settles deep in the bones. Most people know the surface details: the divorce announcement, the rumors, the whispers of betrayal that fans still argue about to this day. But the truth, the real truth, rarely fits into a headline. It doesn't fit neatly into a tabloid cover or a social media post. It lives in the moments that no one sees. The choices made in private, the words spoken behind closed doors, the silences that reveal far more than the loudest accusations ever could, because every story has two sides. But between those two sides lies the version that never reaches the public, the version neither Blake nor Miranda has ever told directly, yet somehow keeps echoing through their careers, their music, and their lives. Blake once admitted that meeting Miranda changed everything he understood about love. And that shift didn't happen slowly or gently. It didn't arrive with logic or timing or caution. It crashed into his life all at once, unpredictable, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. They met on stage, their voices blending before their lives ever did, and the chemistry was unmistakable. Almost too unmistakable. But the timing was all wrong. Blake was married. Miranda was young, ambitious, and rising fast. One duet became a friendship. The friendship deepened into something harder to name. And by the time Blake announced his first divorce, the world was already questioning the timeline, wondering what had really happened beneath the smiles and the stage lights. Rumors grew legs. Speculation grew roots. And even years later, fans still revisit that chapter, trying to make sense of a beginning that never felt entirely clean. Because when a relationship begins in the middle of a storm, it rarely settles into stillness afterward. When they finally married in 2011, the wedding felt like the merging of two kingdoms, two powerful forces in country music joining their lives, their identities, and their futures. To fans, it looked like a fairy tale. But in private, pressure seeped through the cracks almost immediately. Blake's career was exploding. The Voice transformed him from a country star into a household name. He was suddenly everywhere on television screens, in interviews, in headlines. His fame multiplied overnight. Miranda's career was rising just as fast. She became one of the most awarded women in country music, A powerhouse standing entirely on her own, forging an identity that didn't lean on anyone else's spotlight. Two empires. One marriage caught between them. And the hard truth is that success doesn't always make life easier. Sometimes it complicates everything. Their schedules barely aligned. Their priorities began to drift. Their identities grew faster than their relationship could keep up with. And when life pulls two people in opposite directions, love alone doesn't always anchor them. Sometimes success reshapes people, but in ways that do not always synchronize. The part fans never stopped debating was the cloud of rumors that followed the couple throughout their marriage. Stories surfaced, sometimes vague, sometimes detailed, sometimes suspiciously well-timed. The public devoured every headline, assigning blame to one side, then the other, then back again. But in truth, no one outside of their inner circle ever knew what happened behind those closed doors. Blake hinted in interviews that Miranda may not have been faithful. Miranda's lyrics later hinted at betrayal she never explicitly named. Their music said things their voices didn't, and as the rumors intensified, the two stopped protecting the marriage together and began protecting themselves. Separately, that was the turning point when two people stop fighting for each other and start fighting for their own version of the story. By 2015, those closest to them could already sense the ending long before the world did. The distance wasn't subtle. The exhaustion clung to them like a second skin. And when the divorce finally came, it wasn't a shock to the insiders, it was a formality. But to the public, the announcement felt abrupt. Too abrupt. A knife slice across a chapter that still felt unfinished. The official statement was short and emotionless, almost cold in its simplicity. No blame, no detail. Just finality. Blake later described the process as quick. Two people, no kids. No assets that couldn't be split, but even in that simplicity, there was a heaviness he didn't put into words, because their lives hadn't been unraveling on paper. They'd been unraveling in silence. For Miranda, the divorce felt like a wound she didn't see coming, a rupture she had to process without the luxury of privacy. For Blake, it felt like stepping out of a storm he could no longer weather. And when two people are hurting in different ways, they rarely heal at the same pace. Blake moved forward quickly, shockingly quickly. According to fans, forming a connection with Gwen Stefani that blindsided the public. Some people dismissed it as rebound energy. Others insisted it was fate. Others whispered that maybe the seeds of the relationship had been growing far earlier than anyone realized. No matter the truth, the timing raised eyebrows. The questions grew louder. And once again, the timelines became part of the mystery. Miranda didn't move forward in the same way. Her healing came through music, through storytelling, through disappearing from the spotlight and returning only when she had something she was ready to say. Her songs painted pictures of loss, regret, and trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. She wasn't pointing fingers. She was grieving. She was processing a life she thought she was building forever. Years passed. Both remarried. Both changed in ways neither could have predicted when they first met on a small stage all those years ago. Blake softened. Miranda strengthened. And the versions of themselves they became after the divorce carried pieces of each other, shadows of a love that burned fast. Bright, and far too hot to control. Yet even now, something about their story still feels unfinished to the public. Maybe it's the questions left hanging in the air. Maybe it's the contradictions in their narratives. Maybe it's the music, because music often reveals truths artists are too careful to say aloud. Why did Blake suggest in interviews that Miranda broke his trust? Why did Miranda's albums sound like she was the one blindsided? Why did both of them seem to be hurt, yet neither ever gave a full explanation? Some endings don't offer closure. Some endings don't answer the questions people want answered. Some endings simply stop, even when the story still feels open. But one fact remains clear. Blake and Miranda changed each other. Their marriage reshaped their careers, their voices, their vulnerabilities. The passion that bonded them also burned them. And the years spent together carved themselves into the years lived apart. Their marriage didn't collapse because of one rumor or one fight or one betrayal. It collapsed because two people grew in different directions while the world watched. Every misstep like it was entertainment. Love doesn't always fade out slowly. Sometimes it ends because the weight of life becomes too heavy for the relationship carrying it. So what was the real story of Blake Shelton and Miranda Lambert? Not the gossip. Not the accusations. Not the blame fans still fling back and forth across social media. The real truth is quieter. More human. More complicated. Two people loved each other deeply. Two people hurt each other unintentionally. Two people tried to create a future while standing on foundations that were cracked long before they noticed the fractures. And in the end, letting go wasn't scandal. It wasn't betrayal. It was release. It was breath. It was the moment they finally accepted that love alone wasn't enough to keep them from drifting apart. That's the truth beneath the rumors. The truth beneath the songs. The truth beneath a decade of speculation. A truth that doesn't need sensational headlines. A truth that simply says, they loved. They lost. They grew. They moved on. And sometimes, that's the only ending a story like theirs can have.